The retcon, retroactive continuity. This is basically when a comic book company changes the history of a character or an event in order for it to make sense with whatever story they are now trying to tell. And DC Comics is quite notorious for their use of the retcon. For example, when Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things that he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learn that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer Jeff Johns stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Now, some retcons are hard to believe, and others are both hard to believe and even harder to keep track of. For example, Hawkman, the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hall, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of archaeologist Carter Hall. Now, 2 years later, we learn that these 2 different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. So these 2 people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. Then, in 1994's Zero Hour, they make it so that these 2 are just one person. Then, in 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is and always has been a space cop from Thanagar. Then, in 2017, it's explained that Carter Hall was actually a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was taken out with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally, in 2018, it's decided that he can reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. But Hawkman isn't the only victim of multiple origin retcons. Another character who got a similar treatment is Donna Troy. The story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up, but even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together, and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Now, in one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on a whole other level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, DC's Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, But unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was an example of the way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male heroes, aka fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some really interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's mind as well? It caused Bruce Wayne to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye, and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. But one of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to the retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed straight up just rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean that they aren't as important, because they are. But moving on from that, when Jason Todd first showed up on the scene after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was kind of downhill from the start. DC made Jason Todd's backstory almost identical to that of Grayson himself, with Jason being part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. So already, this Robin seemed to be targeted by Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old Robin back. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the worst part. After his passing at the hands of the Joker and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, Jason revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was because Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick Grayson and to avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. And sure, that makes some sense, but it makes Batman seem like an absolutely horrible Bat Dad. But going back to the New 52 era for this next point, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was now, in the New 52, not a founding member of the team, a place that the character had held onto for years. Instead, his spot was now taken by Cyborg, who was also now created thanks to a mother box. Now this had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans as well, and by that, I mean it was erased completely. Now I personally liked the change just a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John Jones is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be one of the original defenders of the planet. Now when the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes are quite a bit younger. This unfortunately causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked, but DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this, so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. But last up for today, Hal Jordan was possibly the greatest Green Lantern, according to the comics at least, but in the 90s, that kinda changed. After the death of Superman and the subsequent reign of the Supermen, Coast City, Hal Jordan's home, was destroyed. This completely changed the Lantern, and he even tried using his power ring to try and revive the city, which was against the Green Lantern's rules. When the Guardians of the Universe tried to stop him, he completely snapped. He went off the handle, ending the lives of every single Green Lantern, taking their rings in hopes of becoming so powerful that he could restart the universe and save his city.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Superman's Secret. Ooh, so in Superman issue 300 back in 1939, we see the front cover of this issue and it shows in big text, "Revealed at last, the startling secret of how Superman fools the world with his Clark Kent identity." And you see Superman on the cover like, "Lana, look at my face. Do you believe me?" He's on point, like he's very aggressive. He's like, "I'm Clark Kent, look at my face." It's basically what we've all been thinking when we see this guy in his disguise. The whole issue is about how dumb the glasses disguise is. And it's pretty funny at first. But the thing that sucked was that he explained how his glasses are made from Kryptonian plexiglass and how that intensifies the low-level hypnotic effect. So people see him as Clark Kent rather than Superman. So he can be dressed in his gear and people are like, "No, you're definitely Clark Kent. I'm looking right at you. Your chest is the size of a car, but you know what? I think you're still Clark Kent." It wasn't until Byrne's 1986 reboot until this power was dropped. Thankfully. Because if they had kept that idea, then it would have made the comics where Bruce Wayne pretends to be Superman pretty unnecessary. Also, if Superman has these powers in comics or movies, that would just be hilarious. It would just be Henry Cavill at the bar in his Superman gear just flexing, then a guy pours a beer on his head while we're just staring at him in costume. That would have just been weird. That guy should have been punched out to space also. Forget about his truck being stuck in trees. He should have grabbed him and just went, gone. Number 9, One Punch Man. Superboy Prime punches through reality itself. It is one of the most talked about events in DC's comic book history, and it has fans split over the overall decision. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened and brought together all these Golden Age and Silver Age heroes into the same place. It was a move made to retcon certain plot points while setting up a brighter and certainly bolder future. So what happens when you lock Superboy Prime up in a pocket universe? Well, once he's out, he gets so mad that he punches, but he doesn't just punch a hole in the wall like your classic Kyle from high school. No. He punches through reality, creating the multiverse, bringing back the dead Robin from the 80s, Jason Todd, to life. And that wasn't the only change though when it comes to the multiverse collapsing. Like Elastigirl's resurrection, and then the other characters come back as if they had truly never died. Like we had Lynx, Reactron, Ventriloquist, Scarface, and Magpie. This punch also changed some major history with Joe Chill, which I'll get into later. The numerous versions of General Zod were also replaced by just the one version. So, what a mess. Just what a mess. Number 8, Catwoman's origin. Okay, this one's super funny to me. So, Frank Miller released Batman Year One, and it was this dark and gritty issue. And included with it had Selena Kyle's true origins. She lived life on the streets and resorted to work just to make ends meet. People loved this dark origin story. This was a superhero origin story. Then the New 52 released Catwoman 0 in 2011, and the origin went from dark and DC-like to just, well, this. She is seen as this amateur thief, and she has an epiphany while falling out of a window, and she smacks the ground quite hard. And then, out of nowhere, a group of stray cats appear and start to lick her back to life. Look at her face, getting all sticky. First of all, the sound. Second of all, the smell. Wouldn't be the best. Basically just doing what Tim Burton did, but on the page. No way. Number 7, after the New 52 retcon, we saw Barbara Gordon in an entirely new way. So Alan Moore released The Killing Joke, and in this comic, we see a paralyzed Barbara Gordon from the waist down. She then became Oracle and did a pretty bang-up job with the Bat family. Also, she's in a wheelchair. How often do you see that? More inclusion for the win, folks. Let's get it. But with the New 52 retcon, we have Barbara Gordon back as Batgirl. So while some fans are happy with the change, most have expressed quite a bit of rage online, rightfully so. Number 6, Identity Crisis. Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis was a 7-part issue released back in 2004. The first issue actually did really well with pre-orders, passing I think like 160,000. But come issue 2, fans weren't nearly as interested the first time around. There was a huge decline in numbers. Why though? Well, the cruelty of the content was deemed a bit too much for comic book readers at the time. It had basically turned into a murder mystery about the death of Sue Dibney. Fans weren't on board with how dark the story got with certain details, some drawing the conclusion that it was done just for shock value. Fans have said that every character involved in that comic was just ruined. So what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Comment down below. Number 5, Evil Amazons. Yeah, you heard that correctly. The New 52 comes through yet again to disappoint fans. The New 52 Wonder Woman series began in June 2016, and Brian Azzarello made the Amazons' origin so that they attacked sailors on the high seas that were too close to their land. Okay, and if that wasn't bad enough, Azzarello even went so far as to make the Amazons murder these sailors and then toss their bodies in the water. And if they have any sons, well, those sons are being sold right into slavery. I don't think we'll be seeing this in the Wonder Woman sequel. I mean, maybe? Imagine if they went from like the first movie to like a band of hardcore pirates just whipping people off boats. Get out of town. The Wonder Woman Clay origin was preferred over the new stuff. These false memories that were written to her story were liked. I mean, rightfully so. Number 4, What is Love? More like, where is love? Green Arrow and Black Canary are an iconic couple, or rather, were. The two have been together since their early issues in the 60s, and then the reboot came along in 2011, and they weren't lovers anymore. What? For 5 years, readers had to watch them not be in love, and it was a weird time. Eventually, DC listened, and then when DC Rebirth happened, the couple was back together again. Now, this made fans happy, of course, but that was 5 years of storytelling, and now those issues are just scrapped. Awesome, sick, 5 years. A lot of words, a lot of eye movements. Thanks. Number 3, Dead or Alive. Superboy issue 158 came out in 1949, so it was a little while back now. And the cover of the issue is enough to pull any reader in. It shows Superboy in space looking down at a capsule with his parents in it. And the words, "They're alive, my real mother and father." And behold, a couple of sleeping beauties. Jor-El and Lara were drifting in space for 15 years. The radio transmission comes in, calling Kal-El, and then he's like, yo, that's my name, let's do it, let's go. And it's a nice moment or two. Superboy reflects on recognizing his parents' voices, even though he was just a wee baby when he last saw them. So how sweet. But in the New 52 Rebirth storylines, apparently Jor-El survived the Krypton explosion, thanks to Dr. Manhattan, and he then became Mr. Oz, who was like a villain. This New 52 retcon makes absolute no sense. We saw Krypton's death, and we also saw his parents dying in it with our eyes. Number 2, Jack and Joe. We all know the name Joe Chill, the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, Martha and Thomas Wayne. Now, after watching the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, there's now another name in our minds when we think of the person that killed his parents. We of course think back to the Joker, and having him as the one who killed his parents in the movie. So which is the right one? Which one's true? So fans had to wonder this for years. If Joe Chill was actually the killer, these are confusing times. And then in Infinite Crisis issue 6, we see that Chill is again the killer of the Wayne's family. Thankfully, I mean, part of Batman's story was based off this way of things. And after Infinite Crisis, they made it so Chill was arrested the same night he killed Bruce Wayne's parents. These stories are way too confusing at times. Even reading this, my brain hurts. And finally, number 1, no kill. We all know Batman by his one rule, and breaking that rule is Joker's goal in the Dark Knight film, to never kill. Of course, having his parents die at the hands of a killer, one would assume he's not too fond of the act. But let's go back. Let's go back to Batman's first appearance. Back in 1939, Detective Comics issue 27. We straight up see Bruce push a guy into acid. Acid! It's said in the early days that many criminals died by the hands of the Bat. Bill Finger came in and retconned it so the Caped Crusader, starting in Batman issue 6, tells Robin that we never kill with weapons of any kind. With weapons? Ooh, gotta read the fine print, I don't know. No, Batman at that point still goes by the no kill rule. But what do you guys think? Was his actions, like in Batman vs Superman, unwarranted? I mean, this is obviously a darker, older version of the Batman where clearly people close to him have died. I personally think he should kill. Make it so he pops dudes. People love the Punisher. I mean, you know, he wrecks people. Go get him, Batsy.
Batman has been kicking it in DC Comics since 1939, and with a continuity as confusing as DC's, he has gone through quite a few interesting retcons. Batman has received a few origin stories over the years the character has been around, but of them all, Batman Year One may be the best. Very similar to Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, the story shows Bruce Wayne returning to Gotham City after his many years traveling the globe and training with many different masters. He comes in with a roughed out idea for how to bring justice to Gotham, and the story ends with him setting out goals and having a defined mission. But before he has that, Bruce goes out into the streets of Gotham without a costume and trying to fight crime, and as you might expect, he gets pretty thoroughly thrashed. Bruce goes back home, not doing too well physically, and he takes a little bit of a rest in his father's chair. As he dwells on the passing of his parents and asking for a sign of what he must do, through the night, a literal bat comes crashing through his window, and that is why he becomes Batman. It's iconic. Well, in Batman Court of Owls, that iconic image is defouled by the arrival of an owl that pretty brutally wipes that bat from the face of the earth. Considering the Court of Owls' role in the story, it's impossible to argue that it's not a rather on-the-nose attempt at symbolism, but there are some that absolutely hate that DC did this, and there are also some that appreciate the power of the new image. Now, Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, actually no, that was not always the case. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne, not as a returning childhood butler, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so Alfred had always been within the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that the change was made and stuck. When Batman became the God of Knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair during the Darkseid War event in Justice League Volume 2 number 42 from 2015, he became able to find out the answer to pretty much any question he asked, and one of the first things he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. Now, this was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learn that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer, Jeff Johns, stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Personally, I think it's best this stays in Elseworlds, as it just opens up way too many questions about Batman's already weird continuity. Now, Batman has many iconic villains like the Joker, and all of them stick out in their own individual ways, but there is a strong case to say that Mr. Freeze may actually be one of the most iconic. It may be due to some iconic Batman cartoons, but it's more so to do with the fact that Mr. Freeze has a more understandable motive to commit crime than a lot of Batman's other villains, saving the life of his wife. It's so understandable that while Batman still attempts to stop Freeze, he still finds himself empathizing with the villain in a way that he doesn't with a lot of other villains. So it came as a shock to a lot of people when the New 52 came about and Scott Snyder retconned the continuity so that Mr. Freeze's beloved Nora Freeze became Nora Fields, and Mr. Freeze had actually never even met her while she was living normally. As you can imagine, people were not happy about this, and imagining Nora not as Freeze's wife is just wrong. It's just wrong, man. Now, Batman has a huge plethora of fantastic stories. There are so many iconic ones, and Batman Hush is definitely among them. Striking at the childhood of Bruce Wayne's life with the return of a friend and a mysterious new villain who puts Batman through the ringer, it's a story that features almost all of Batman's biggest villains and hits at almost his entire history. One of the highlights of the story was a fight taking place in a cemetery where Jason Todd, Batman's second doomed Robin, reveals himself to be returned from the grave. The pair face off against each other, and it's eventually revealed that this was actually just the villain Clayface taking on the appearance of Jason Jason to just really mess with Batman. What's crazy is how Batman knew Jason had passed away, but he was still pretty suspicious that this was actually him because he was really giving Batman a run for his money during the fight. Well, then we got Batman Annual Volume 1 number 25, and it was revealed and retconned that Batman was indeed fighting the revived Jason Todd, and that he and Clayface had managed to trade places near the end of the fight, keeping Batman unaware that the real Jason Todd was running around alive and much stronger. Now, like I said way before, Year 1 was Batman's greatest origin story, but it really only gave Batman his origin and didn't show us how Gotham got all its colorfully dressed lunatics. Enter The Long Halloween. The Long Halloween takes place over several months and goes through all the seasons. It starts with Bruce being pressured by Carmine Falcone to launder money for him. Bruce then runs into a beaten up Harvey Dent, meets Catwoman, then meets up with Jim Gordon and Dent, who decide to band together to take down Falcone. The scene was actually adapted into 2008's The Dark Knight, but the best moment from the story happens near the middle. This is when the Joker shows up. Joker ends up sending a whole aeroplane careening through the Gotham night, and it leads to an incredibly awesome fight where Batman battles him while also attempting to straighten out the plane and save everyone from being injured. It's amazing. So where's the retcon? Well, this entire sequence was completely taken out of continuity by the Infinite Crisis event, which rewrote various aspects of the previous timeline. Boo. Dick Grayson was the first Robin, and he was an amazing Robin, but his story got so much better when he rose above being a sidekick and became his own hero in the form of Nightwing. The growth and agency that Grayson gets from growing up and moving past being the boy wonder on his own to become Nightwing makes the character just so much more. So naturally, one of the most hated retcons for fans of both Batman and Nightwing was when DC made it so that Batman fires Dick Grayson as Robin rather than having the future Nightwing make the decision for himself. The post-crisis version of events sees Bruce push Grayson away as Robin, culminating in Batman Volume 1 number 416 from 1988, where the firing first took place. The event was mirrored in Nightwing Volume 4 number 79 more recently, where Bruce yells at Grayson to get out of my cave, which kind of made me laugh, if I'm honest, when I first saw it. It's both really strange to see Bruce being such an absolute jerk, but like I said, it also took all of Dick Grayson's agency in forging his own identity away from Batman. One of the best Batman villains to come out of his 70s gritty rebranding was the infamous Ra's al Ghul. First appearing in the story Daughter of the Demon, Al Ghul shows up in the Batcave one day saying he has kidnapped Robin. Immediately, this sets Ra's apart from the criminals Batman is used to dealing with. Now, naturally, Batman saves Robin while also faking the passing of his alter ego, Bruce Wayne. So now, Batman takes the fight back to Ra's al Ghul. Bruce and Robin track him down to the desert where Ra's and Talia al Ghul are attempting to create a plague to wipe out the Earth's population. Ra's gets resurrected by the Lazarus Pits, and the Dark Knight, who was shirtless for some reason but not tightless, like he still had the bottoms on, and the Demon's Head engage in a battle of fisticuffs. Ra's manages to defeat Batman but gets bamboozled when Batman recovers and tracks Ra's back to his camp. Batman comes busting into Ra's tent, taking the villain completely off guard as he yells, "Are you a man or a fiend from hell?" It's iconic. It sets Batman as a strategist and combatant that he hadn't really been before, and the whole thing was wiped out from canon by Crisis on Infinite Earths. When the DC universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuities so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes were quite a bit younger. This, unfortunately, causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with just Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked. But DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd established in their roles. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim, the third Robin, was originally introduced after Jason Todd had passed away at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin, and fans hated this so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Another consequence of New 52 was that in order to explain how Batman had a 10-year-old son, Damian was also retconned to be a genetically engineered baby who had grown faster than normal. It's weird. Now, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the horrible crimes he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated, so it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight strapped with a gat, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. Batman, alongside a lot of other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for lead and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just putting them in the hospital for a long time, I guess.
Do you think that you know who Aquaman is? Did Batman used to run around sending criminals to the grave? Stick around and find out, because today on Top 10 Nerd, we're talking DC Comics retcons. And coming up first today, most DC fans recognize the hero known as the Spectre as one of the most powerful beings in the comic book universe. As a personification of God's spirit of vengeance, Spectre was an ancient force of pure justice, and he is so astronomical in his scope that he requires a human host in order to even be able to comprehend our human nature. One of the first of these hosts was Jim Corrigan, who was resurrected after his passing in order to become the host for the Spectre. But what may surprise some people to find out is that originally, during the Golden Age, Jim and the Spectre were actually just simply the same guy, with Jim just being a detective who would dress up as the Spectre and had some pretty cool ghost-like powers. The retcon here came when DC decided to split the two into two different entities entirely, making the Spectre one of the most powerful beings to exist in their comics. Now, during the first part of this list, we talked about how during the New 52 reboot, DC had altered the Justice League's starting lineup, replacing Martian Manhunter with the Earthbound hero Cyborg. Now, when Cyborg first showed up on the scene, he was a star football player who got extremely injured, which led to his scientist father to merge his body with advanced technology to create the technological hero who then debuted as a member of the Teen Titans. Well, alongside his new debut as a founding member of the Justice League, his origin was also slightly tweaked to have it so that the advanced technology that he was merged with was now a mother box from Darkseid's world of Apocalypse. This was a huge boost up in his actual power, giving him a huge list of new abilities and making him much more significant in the conflict with Darkseid, who was the one who brought together this team of powerful justice-inclined heroes. And it became the new favorite origin as well, even being the origin shown in Zack Snyder's Justice League live-action movie. But moving on from that, anytime a new Batman movie is set to come out, one of the biggest questions anyone has is who is going to be playing Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, sure, whatever, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, a mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, what if I told you that actually, no, that was not always true. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne for the first time. Not as a childhood butler of the character, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so that Alfred had always been with the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that that change stuck around. But sticking with Batman here for a sec, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the horrible crimes that he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just kinda has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight wielding a 9mm, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. That's right, the Batman, alongside almost all the other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for bullets and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just severely maiming them. But moving on from Batman to another Justice Leaguer, the Flash is one character that I think people don't actually realize had an incredibly tragic life. Like, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for him, with one of the biggest being the passing of his own mother, which was then blamed on his father, who didn't actually do it. For a while, Barry Allen had been wiped out, but actually transported into the Speed Force. So when he returned in Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth, he had a big huge face-off with Eobard Thawne, his most iconic villain, the Reverse Flash. But DC brought a massive change to Eobard's character when they made it so that this time-traveling villain was actually the one to cause almost every single hardship the Flash had ever had, including the passing of his own mom. In Flashpoint Reverse Flash, we actually get to see Eobard traveling into the past and trying to end the Flash, but since he can't do that because he'll create a paradox and he can't take out Iris West, who's Barry's girlfriend or lover, he just decides to go back to Barry's childhood and make Barry's younger days a literal nightmare. He makes the young Barry fall downstairs, he makes him miss catching a baseball, makes him drop all his books and his papers. Eobard even snatched away the one friend that Barry Allen had, erasing him from the time stream completely. It's not funny, but just remembering the look on Barry's face as this full-grown man dressed in yellow just ruins his life, it kinda cracks me up. I'm sorry. Now, have you ever wondered how DC Comics first got their multiverse? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, who was Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when Barry got powers, he took on the identity of that hero to honor him. This was eventually retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally found himself transported to Jay Garrick's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe entirely called Earth 2, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that Fox had remembered and written down. As Barry explained it, quote, "Obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was tuned in on Jay's vibratory Earth," which is a weird sentence. Now this was a super weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick back into the real world, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe because this is also the first introduction of the DC multiverse in order to explain all the Golden Age heroes and how they existed at the same time as all the new heroes. But then they created a whole other problem, which is why we got the Crisis on Infinite Earths in order to clear everything up, which it didn't even do. I don't want to get into that though, so we're gonna move on. Now this one is one that I'm not sure if everyone knows about. I think like half the fans know and the other half have no idea. Basically, when Wonder Woman first came on the scene, the character being tied up happened to an increasingly uncomfortable degree. This was because her co-creator, William Moulton Marston, incorporated his, preferences into her stories and powers. Like, infamously, he made Wonder Woman's greatest weakness being tied up or subdued by a man. This was pretty quickly retconned even before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on comics in the 50s. Later writers didn't share Marston's interests and views and felt that Wonder Woman's weird and oddly specific weaknesses were unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but just a tiny bit sexist and humiliating as well. This major DC retcon went unnoticed for actually a really long time until some dedicated readers dug into Wonder Woman's past. But speaking of that, Arthur Curry is Aquaman. He's the guy. When people think of the blonde-haired, golden fish scale wearing hero, they are thinking of Arthur Curry. Or are they? Ooh. Arthur Curry is DC's official Aquaman. That part isn't wrong, but when you look at the Golden Age Aquaman, that is actually not Arthur Curry. That version of the character, who looks basically the exact same, with all the same powers, is actually just some unnamed water-based hero who actually kind of despises us regular Earth humans and fought against the Axis powers during World War War II. DC had only introduced Arthur during the Silver Age of comics, and he became accepted as just the guy who had always been Aquaman. As he got more and more popular, DC just kind of quietly swept Golden Age Aquaman under the rug and pretended that they were the same person the whole time. It's actually kind of hilarious because the only reason no one realized was because, I mean, it's Aquaman. No one cared. Now when it comes to the Green Lanterns, John Stewart is pretty universally known as the serious, disciplined one, and that is mainly to do with the fact that he is a retired US Marine. But despite his current gruff, serious, hard reputation, a lot of people forget that when John Stewart first came on the scene, he was actually a pretty rebellious dude who actually had a background as an architect. He was chosen by the Guardians specifically because he was rebellious. Hal Jordan at the time was the Green Lantern's super conservative, serious, main guy lantern, and they chose Stewart specifically to counter him. It wasn't until the animated series that John was finally introduced in the way that we actually know him today. Last but certainly not least today, I have decided to include what may just be the most hated retcon to grace the pages of the New 52 reboot, turning Lobo into Lamo. In Justice League 23.2 Lobo, it was revealed that the Lobo that we know, the big bike-riding, foul-mouthed, regenerating, Gene Simmons-looking space bounty hunter who pretty much every single comic book fan loved, was actually just an imposter. In actuality, a younger, short-haired, boring, generic as hell looking tiny little dude was actually the real, genuine Lobo. And to usher that change in, Lobo #1 gave us this new Lobo beheading the fan-loved version of the character and deactivating his healing factor. Needless to say, no one liked this version of Lobo, and if you did, I don't believe you and you're just saying that to be difficult. Thankfully, the original version of the character was restored to greatness and we can just forget this ever happened. Please.
Number 10, The Three Jokers. At the bottom of our list is the Three Jokers story. This is because it isn't canon to the main DC universe, but the setup is. When Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story The Three Jokers, we learned that the reason the Joker acts so differently depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who killed Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer, Jeff Johns, stated that it was because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it. Comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Personally, I think it's best this stays in Elseworlds, as it just opens up too many questions about Batman's already kinda weird continuity.
Number 9, Martian Manhunter. Put some respect on my boy's name. In the New 52 era, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was not a founding member of the team, a place that he held for years. Instead, his spot was taken by Cyborg, who was now created thanks to a mother box. This had a ripple effect of changing the important place Cyborg held in the Teen Titans, meaning it was erased completely. I personally liked the change a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be the one of the original defenders of the planet. It may be a weak argument, and I know that many people weren't too happy with the changes to both the JLA and the Titans. Let me know your thoughts.
Number 8, Hal Jordan, from hero to villain to host. Hal Jordan was one of the most beloved and respected members of the Green Lantern Corps. When his home, Coast City, was destroyed by supervillains, he was consumed by grief. He tried to recreate his city and its inhabitants with his ring, but as this was against the ring rules, he was summoned by the Guardians of the Universe for judgment. He snapped and killed pretty much the entire Green Lantern Corps, taking their rings in hopes of becoming so powerful that he could restart the universe and save his city. He started calling himself Parallax and was now a villain. He eventually learned the error of his ways and sacrificed himself to save the day and died. DC eventually wanted to bring him back as Green Lantern, but realized realized that would be really hard with him having committed so much genocide since he was a hero. They retconned it so that he was actually being influenced by a yellow fear demon named Parallax who had taken over his mind. This allowed Hal to rejoin the Green Lanterns, be a member of the Justice League, and become the Lantern's golden boy again by absolving him of any responsibility for his actions.
Number 7. The Justice Society. One of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC's comic book history both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like such a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans this one seemed just straight up rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean they aren't as important. Respect your elders, DC. Come on!
Number 6. Tim Drake. Robin no more? When the DC universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC editorial wanted to make their heroes younger and changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked. But DC wanted to have their cake and eat it too, wanting a younger Batman, but still wanting to use characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. In order to accommodate the new timeline, retcons to the various Robins' backstories had to be made. Dick and Jason got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne. Believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself, being the main boy wonder from 1990 until 2009 when Damian Wayne became the new Robin and Tim Drake became Red Robin. In New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never Robin, having apparently always been Red Robin. Fans hated this, and his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Another consequence of the New 52 was that in order to explain how Batman had a 10-year-old son, Damian was retconned to be a genetically engineered baby who had grown faster than normal.
Number 5. Identity. Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. Whether it was the super unnecessary and inappropriate use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which itself was an example of the crappy way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male hero, aka fridging, or the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman as well? It caused Bruce to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother I and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice. It caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. Also, can DC stop calling every damn event a crisis? I am in crisis just trying to keep track of them all.
Number 4. Jay Garrick. Fictional or nah? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, they explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So when Barry got powers, he took on the identity to honor him, making the Flash a cosplayer. This was retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally was transported to Jay's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that he had remembered and written down. As Barry explained, obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was turned in on Jay's vibratory Earth. This was a weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe, as this is also the introduction of the DC multiverse.
Number 3. Jason Todd. Ah, yes, the over-aggressive black sheep of the Bat family, the poster boy for toxic Batman fans everywhere, and the most lazily written Robin of the bunch. At least at first. When Jason Todd first showed up on the scene, after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was downhill from the start. For starters, DC made his backstory almost identical to that of Dick himself. Jason was part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. This time it's the Killer Croc's fault. Very original, DC. I see what you did there. Very nice, yes. So already this Robin seemed to be the target of Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson, but Jason wasn't Grayson, obviously. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old guy back. I'd be mad too. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the weird retcon. After his passing at the hands of the Joker, and technically at the hands of the fans, and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, he revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was the fact that Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick and avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. Sure, it makes some sense, but my god, Batman needs to learn how to be a better Bat Dad. Number 2. Punching reality. In one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on another level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. We did a whole explained on the DC continuity, so if you want to check that out, we will add a link for you right somewhere over here.
Number 1. Hawkman's origin. Hawkman has one of the most notoriously difficult origins to keep track of in all of comics, so I will be giving you an abridged version of his history. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall, spelled like this. Carter becomes Hawkman and fights crime. With me so far? When reintroduced in 1961, he is an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Carter Hall, spelt like this. He comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of an archaeologist named Carter Hall, with the original spelling. It makes sense when you think of him as a total reinvention of the original character. Where things start to get confusing is 2 years later when we learn that the two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original archaeologist being on Earth 2. In 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all of the worlds are combined into one. How to handle the continuity? Well, they changed it so that they were two different people who just happened to have similar sounding names and were both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. In 1994, 0 Hour happens and all of the various Hawkmen become one guy, but it doesn't stick. In 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he has always been a space cop from Thanagar. In 2017, Carter with a C is reintroduced, with it being explained that he reincarnates because the knife he was killed with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship, kind of introducing elements of both of the origins. In 2018, we learned that the two versions have become one again, with the space cop being one of Carter with a C's reincarnations, retconning the character to be able to be reborn not just in different eras on Earth, but on other planets as well. So, to sum it up briefly, reincarnated Pharaoh becomes space cop, becomes two different people. He's retconned to have only ever been a space cop, and is retconned one last time to be a reincarnated Pharaoh who in one of his lives was an alien space cop. Which, when you say it like that, makes perfect sense. By the way, most of this can also be applied to Hawkgirl.
And at number 10, Joe Chill who? One character that is critical to the Batman mythos but is constantly subjected to changes is Joe Chill, the petty criminal who killed Bruce Wayne's parents in that alleyway when he was a boy. For starters, Joe Chill being the one responsible was briefly retconned in the 90s with 0 Hour, and the truth was left hanging for years concerning whether or not Chill was really the one behind the Wayne's deaths. Then, in 2006 Infinite Crisis issue 6, he was confirmed to be their killer once again. But let's backtrack a little. This is where it gets annoying, frustrating, and a little scary, if messing with continuity or the thought of doing so is something that is frightful to you, which it should be, especially considering all of the mess that DC has created with Joe Chill. The way in which Batman discovers that Joe is his parents' killer has changed time and time again. It seems as if every several years we get a new take on Bruce's origin story, and him confronting Joe, or him rediscovering that Joe was the one who pulled the trigger, or him hunting him down and having some big moral dilemma about the whole darn thing. There have been multiple variations pertaining to Joe Chill's fate, various suspects, various storylines in which DC characters have believed to find new evidence, and then hunted down the real person responsible. Initially, we got a glimpse of this back in Detective Comics issue 33 in 1939. That was when we got Batman's origin story for the very first time. In 1948, in Batman issue 47, that man who murdered the Waynes was revealed to be a guy named Joe Chill. But then, the story changed again in 1956, then another time in 1968, then again in 1969, again in 1972, 1976, another time in 1982 where he was the Joker's hitman, and that whole storyline would then be shown in the 1989 Batman movie, then again in 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987, 1989, 1998 in which Selina Kyle witnessed their murders, in 1999 in which the Wayne board was really behind it, 2001, 2003, 2006, 2008 in which Joe Chill commits suicide thanks to Batman's persuasion, 2012 in which the Penguin was suspected to be behind the hit, 2015 in which Batman encounters him through the powers he develops from the Mobius chair, and so many more adaptations that we didn't even cover. Most of the ones we did were in the comics, but there's a lot of stuff in the animated universe as well, and in other movies, and in Gotham. So if that didn't make sense as to why it's scary, here is another reason why it is pretty darn frightening. All of this retconning literally threatens to change Batman's mythos every single damn time that his origin story is redone. It's frightening. DC, please stop giving us new reasons and new scenarios in which we see Batman have to relive his previous trauma and choose whether or not to kill the man who killed his parents, who may have not actually been the man who killed his parents. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd's hair. This one's a little less stressful than our last number. Back when Jason Todd was first introduced in the comics in 1983, it was as Dick Grayson's replacement, with the former Robin now heading the Teen Titans team. While it was a great thing that the new Teen Titans title was selling, DC felt that Batman may suffer from this, and introduced a brand new Robin that debuted in Batman issue 357. In his first few appearances, he was distinguished from Dick Grayson by having strawberry red hair, which was later changed because the character lacked popularity, so DC strove to make Jason Todd a little bit more like Dick. While that's technically a retcon in itself, perhaps what's even better is the fact that this change in hair color is something Todd would later on address after he was brought back from the dead. More on that later. Todd would admit that when he was Robin, Batman made him dye his hair to look more like Dick Grayson. While he never gives a full reason for Bruce making him do this, it's implied it's some sort of marketing ploy. But really, it just kind of feels like Batman fetishized Grayson, if we're being honest. And at number 8, Martha Kent has a miscarriage. Moving away from the Dark Knight and onto the Man of Steel now, we've got another take on retconned origin stories. In 1986, John Byron rewrote Superman's origin story in the limited series The Man of Steel. In this limited series, the Kents take Clark in as per usual, but Byron added an extra little detail. Prior to finding little Kal-El, Martha had a miscarriage. The Kents decided to exploit that miscarriage and pretend that Clark was actually their own. Guess that's one way of getting out of, neighbors asking questions. So why is this bothersome? It's the fact that the miscarriages became the motivation for why they adopted Clark rather than, out of the goodness of their hearts like in the initial origin story. It felt like an extra factor that was really unnecessary. An attempt to make the Kents more broody and justified in their need of, helping a baby that they found literally in the middle of nowhere. And at number 7, 3 Jokers. Recently, DC came out with their Black Label imprint. Comics aimed at more mature readers that are meant to exist outside of the main continuity for the most part. 3 Jokers is a 3-issue miniseries released under the Black Label imprint, except it was revealed by Jeff Johns that the 3 Jokers is part of the main continuity, which kinda confused some people. And this might be why. That imprint was inspired by a really ridiculous plot point that pretty much just disappeared entirely from the main continuity. So once upon a time in 2016, right at the end of the New 52, before Rebirth started up, Batman found himself in the Mobius chair, a plot device that basically gave him all of the knowledge in the world. Batman learns when he sat in this chair that there's actually 3 Jokers out there instead of 1. Then that revelation was dropped pretty much as soon as it was revealed, and hasn't been touched again since the mention of this Black Label 3 Three Jokers series. Oh boy. And at number 6, Damian Wayne. Back in 1987, DC released Batman Son of the Demon, in which he and Ra's al Ghul team up, and Bruce briefly considers becoming his heir. During that time though, Bruce has an affair with Ra's daughter Talia al Ghul, who ends up getting pregnant but then claims to have had a miscarriage. At the end of the story, it's revealed that she didn't have the miscarriage, and later on, Grant Morrison would introduce Damian Wayne, their son, the one who was conceived during Son of the Demon. Except, he changed some stuff. He was the product of Talia having drugged Bruce, forcibly sleeping with him in order to get pregnant as part of what she termed as a depraved eugenics experiment. So essentially, she raped Batman, and Damian went from being the potential product of a heart-wrenching love affair to one that Batman had no choice in, since Damian's origins have been toyed with, including a retcon that suggested he was created thanks to cloning. Moving on to number 5, Hal Jordan as Parallax. Once upon a time, during the horrible reign of the Superman story arc that was the sequel to the even more horrible Death of the Superman story arc, I had to bring it up, Hal Jordan lost his shit after his home of Coast City was destroyed by Mongol and Cyborg Superman. This occurred in Green Lantern issue 46 and would become known as the Emerald Twilight story arc. A few issues later, completely distressed by Coast City being obliterated, Hal decides to use his power ring to try to recreate it, which is a big no-no for Green Lanterns. The Guardians of the Universe summon him for breaking the rule of using his ring for personal gain, which pisses Hal off even more. So he steals energy from the main power battery on the Guardians planet in order to finish recreating Coast City. The Green Lantern Corps have no choice but to stop him, but Hal ends up killing most of them, stealing each of their rings and leaving many for dead. It's then revealed in issue 50 that he's actually Parallax, the fear space insect of sorts. The literal embodiment of fear. Hal then sacrifices himself in the Final Night story arc, but then 10 years later Green Lantern gets a reboot and everything is retconned. Hal was just possessed, something that Batman would never really let him live down. Moving on to number 4, Barbara Gordon can walk. Again, back in 2011, DC introduced the New 52. The DC universe was essentially reset, with some bits of continuity remaining intact, funny enough. One of those bits of continuity that remained was Barbara Gordon's history with being paralyzed. This is something that occurred in The Killing Joke and saw the character trapped in a wheelchair, retiring from her days as Batgirl, only to rise up and reclaim her heroic identity once more by becoming Oracle. Barbara became an inspiration for physically handicapped readers everywhere, and she was still a total badass too, despite the serious trauma and continuous obstacles that her character continued to face and overcome. But then, the New 52 changed that. While the history was intact, so was Barbara's legs, or I guess technically her spine. Despite having Gail Simone pen the Batgirl series, fans were outraged with the new Batgirl volume for taking Barbara out of her chair and putting her back into the Batgirl costume. Apparently she had received some really helpful and experimental physiotherapy that allowed her to walk again. Many felt that this was harmful to a positive kind of representation that Barbara stood for in the comics previously as Oracle. The one good thing though that the series did explore was the fact that Barbara was still very haunted by her past, and her struggles with her paralysis. It wasn't something that she was just cured of and never addressed again, thankfully. But still, I mean, she's pretty badass as Oracle. Moving on to number 3, a man of many races. The Flash mantle has a history of annoying retcons over the years. One of the worst by far though is Wally West ceasing to exist, but then 2 Wally West existing thanks to retcon messy fun time. So at the start of the New 52 and the DC Universe reboot that came with it, Wally West does not exist, or at least the one we knew didn't exist. Another new Wally West was kicking around, but he was the biracial son of Rudy West. But then that black Wally West was retconned when DC Rebirth came around, which was yet another reboot of the DC Universe, in which the original Wally West was brought back, and this Wally West, known as Wallace West, was the cousin of the original Wally West and the son of the New 52 Reverse Flash, Daniel West. He was also kicking around. Confused yet? Well, don't worry, DC explained the same name thing as a product of the 2 Wallys being named after their great-grandfather. But really, it was just because people were really pissed that the original Wally West had essentially disappeared, and they didn't want to get rid of the black Wally West, so they just were like, they both exist. Good job, DC, good job. Next up at number 2, Watchmen. Watchmen has long been considered one of the most important graphic novels in the history of the medium. When it came out, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were praised by critics for transforming a medium that was often considered to be low art into something that was complex, thought-provoking, and subverted what we believed comics could do. It was a game changer, and it inspired many writers and artists that followed. Watchmen has long been considered a sacred text that does not get touched. Until DC decided that they could milk it for more money. As you can guess, Alan Moore was not fond of that. It first started with Before Watchmen, a group of limited series comics that acted as prequels leading up to the events of the main Watchmen graphic novel. Some of them were great. Darwin Cook, prior to passing away, rest in peace, did a fantastic job with the Minutemen series, expanding on the characters that Alan Moore had so finely crafted without making them into something that, felt out of line. Others weren't as well done. But their sales resulted in an unfortunate domino effect. DC brought the Watchmen into the prime continuity of their comics, making Dr. Manhattan a villain of sorts in the Doomsday Clock limited series, which acted as a direct sequel to Watchmen and tied in stories from the New 52 and Rebirth, because that's exactly what we all asked for, was a sequel to Watchmen. Nobody wanted that. No one. And if you're watching this and you actually wanted that, just go read it again, seriously. Re-educate yourself. That limited series Doomsday Clock is still ongoing now, and apparently by its conclusion the DC universe will be forever changed again. Kinda sounds like one massive retcon in the works again, doesn't it? Doesn't seem uncharacteristic of DC. The reason why it lands on our list is not the fact that it takes something that's so darn good and threatens to ruin it entirely, it's because Dr. Manhattan has been turned into a plot device to explain all of the retconning of the New 52. Dr. Manhattan is said to be the one responsible for rebooting the universe and creating the New 52 universe. Essentially it is a retcon that was put in place to explain another massive retcon that a lot of people didn't really like. It also made Ozymandias regret what he had done in Watchmen, and that just isn't right. That's stupid. You cannot dilute a character like that. That's not fair, guys. And finally, in at number 1, Jason Todd is brought back. Finally, we have the silliest, most wretched retcon of them all. Jason Todd was brought back from the dead, and Superboy Prime punched him back to life. Alright, let's really break down Jason's history here. For starters, in 1988, when Batman's comic sales were suffering thanks to the low popularity of the new Robin, Jason Todd, Dennis O'Neil of DC suggests that allowing the audience to have an interactive experience and vote on a plot point in the comics would not only be a great way to attract audiences, but also solve their little Robin problem. In a 4-part story arc called A Death in the Family, readers had the option to choose to call in and vote on whether or not Jason Todd would survive from an encounter with the Joker. Fans voted that he be killed off. It was a really close call with a 72 vote margin, and evidence came out afterwards that hundreds of votes for Jason's death came in from a single person who had programmed a computer to dial the voting number every 90 seconds for 8 hours. Jason was brutally beaten to death by the Joker, and for a long time, Jason was considered one of the only characters in comic books to never be resurrected. It's almost like a rule. One of the only ones to truly stay dead, along with Bucky Barnes and Uncle Ben. But yeah, look how it panned out for all 3 of them, eh? Anywho, Jason was brought back to life. At first, the idea of him being resurrected was teased as part of the 2003 Hush storyline, but later in 2005, Judd Winnick brought him back into the fray with the Under the Hood story arc, with Todd having a vendetta against Batman. And it just went downhill from there, guys.